Hi, everyone. My name is Snegha. I'm on the Okta team here, and we're here to present a panel on Rethink Active Directory. We've all been going through some pretty crazy times, as well as things change in technology every single day. And an upcoming conversation that comes up a lot with our customers, and I'm sure you've been thinking about this as well, is how we're thinking about the changing landscape and how we're thinking about Active Directory's presence, the new use cases we're thinking about, and of course, another common one, the zero trust journey. Now, more than hearing from me, you're going to hear from our customers today. I'm a senior security specialist at Okta, and I work closely with our customers to see how we can transform and help them in their rethinking AD journey. But instead of hearing from me, I want you to hear from the customers who will be helping us today. So, with that, I want to introduce and welcome Aaron, Gary, and Scott to introduce themselves and help us get started on this journey today.
Thanks, Sam. My name's Aaron Finnis. I'm Information Security Manager at Beach Energy. We're a mid-cap oil and gas company headquartered in South Australia. Over the last couple of years, I've been working at Beach as part of a key cybersecurity transformation program. I'm very excited to share some of the changes we've been making in rethinking Active Directory and our dependence on it, with major changes in implementation of Okta earlier in the year.
I'm Gary Mayden from Pluralsight. We're headquartered in Draper, Utah. We're the technology workforce development company. I've been working here for the last 6 years. The first 2 years of that were without an identity provider, but we have Okta now and no longer looking towards Active Directory.
Hi, my name is Scott Reimert. I work for Invitae. Invitae is bringing genetic information data to mainstream healthcare, and our goal is to aggregate the world's genetic tests into a single service with higher quality and faster turnaround and lower prices. So we started out with AD, like when we founded in 2007, and since 2011 we have had 10 different mergers and acquisitions, and AD became really cumbersome and difficult to manage. So we moved to Okta. We were initially AD mastered, but then ultimately we became Okta mastered, and it's really been a lot better ever since then.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And we're really excited to hear about how you've gone on these journeys in each of your individual companies. I've just set up a few questions for us here today. So hopefully these are questions that our audience will be able to engage with as well to hear about your journey. And then, of course, we'll be able to keep that discussion going. So first, we've talked about Rethink AD, and I'm really curious how in each of these different companies, what particular event or trend, or what were the different factors playing around the time when you were starting to think about the change in your environment to Rethink AD? Scott, did you want to start?
Sure. When we first started, as I mentioned, we initially were an AD shop, and at some point way before I got here in 2019. Invitae deployed Okta and were AD mastered. But after 10 or 12 acquisitions, AD was becoming really difficult to manage. And so we decided at that point to become a hybrid shop and move our identity management to Okta. And we initially, I guess about 4 years ago before I got here, they had made an attempt to become Okta mastered instead of AD mastered. But at the time, Okta was not quite there yet, and there were some sharp edges we encountered. So we had to go back to being AD mastered. And then in 2020, we took another stab at it. I did a lot of research and found out what went wrong the first time, and it was much, much smoother because in the interim, Okta had matured quite a bit. And so now we're Okta mastered, but we're still using AD because there's a lot of applications that are legacy and downstream. We need AD to do what AD does for those that they were developed for.
Great. Thanks, Scott. And I think that's exactly the kind of things we want to start thinking about with moving things to UD, which we'll touch on in just a second. Gary, what about you? How is this journey for you in terms of rethinking AD?
Yeah, when I started at Pluralsight, we actually didn't have an identity provider, so we were kind of open to a lot of things. A few of our offices, specifically the one I started out in, had Active Directory, and some of our smaller satellite offices did, but our headquarters did not. Um, Most of our acquired companies came with some form of Active Directory or LDAP infrastructure, but essentially all of our onboarding was manually done. It's not a fun thing to do to provision access, one at a time. About 3 years after I joined, we started to look at identity solutions a lot. We evaluated Ping, Okta, Centrify, ultimately landed on Okta. I remember during those conversations, we had a back and forth of whether it was time to either just go in completely on Active Directory or take the jump to Okta. Ultimately, we decided to stick with Okta. We don't do computer binds. We're pretty much all SaaS focused, cloud focused. So there really was no use in continuing down an Active Directory path. So we feel that Active Directory for our case is kind of not on the table anymore.
That's great to hear, Gary. I think lifecycle management and some of the things you called out do come up a lot, and it's really cool that you've been able to completely move off of AD. Aaron, how about you? Has this been a different journey? What really triggered thinking about AD not being the core part of your infrastructure?
Yeah, good question. I guess similar to Gary, we had just kind of, we actually had no identity management platform to begin with. So we're starting with essentially green fields, which was a good place to start, I guess, from some perspectives. We just come off the back of an integration of a larger company. So in one of those rare circumstances, we acquired a company about 3 times the size of ourselves. And I just entered Beach as that wrapped up. So I guess the result of that, we were in what I'd consider hybrid hell. So we had a lot of exchange on premise and then in the cloud. So we had some of our users in 365 and not. So there was a lot of change needed in that space. I guess the triggering event was just the immense growth that we had. So we went from around 180 employees to well over 600 and now about 1,100. So that growth, our Active Directory focus, where we were creating accounts, directly in that system manually, we're subject to so many issues, spelling names wrong, writing passwords on paper, those really basic kind of processes breaking down, so at scale. So we needed to quickly move to something more modern. And that's where we evaluated the market. We looked at, Azure Active Directory and Okta. Ultimately, Okta had better integrations with our HR system, so SuccessFactors. And we were purchasing a lot more cloud services at the time as well. We have since then. So we were able to move quite quickly to master all of our users in Okta with integration directly with SuccessFactors, and then automate much of the onboarding, user account provisioning and application access and deprovisioning processes. So which has saved us a lot of time and allowed us, to make additional enhancements further in the future. What that's also meant from a security perspective is that we can reduce the permissions and direct changes to Active Directory, which is, from a security manager's perspective, a really good thing. So our help desk doesn't really need access, for example, to Active Directory. We're able to lock that down. And the cleanup that we've continued to do has kind of simplified the structure. We still use Active Directory for managing our computers, objects, but in the future, we're going to be moving to more of a modern management platform for servers and workstations. So we're definitely heading that direction. It's probably going to be a few years before we kind of get rid of Active Directory completely. And we've got some legacy applications that we'll continue to replace and integrate better with Okta. But we're well on the path for that. And it's certainly that model and architecture today has served us really well.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for that answer. So as everybody here has heard, we've heard about lifecycle management, we've heard about UD, and we've also heard about it may not be possible to just move off of AD completely, but the core component here is meeting your requirements where they are and starting to adapt as things go. Now, one of the core components that everybody brought up was Universal Directory. So just as a reminder to everyone who uses this today or doesn't use it, just about everything it can do for you, as it's a critical component to think about as you start to move your users or maybe start to remove dependency on AD. So UD and Okta today, as you know, is very extensible. You're able to bring users in from any source of your choice. You're also able to create just users locally and have, as we called it, Okta mastered users, therefore not needing another directory in that space. UD is able to drive the permissions you have, what information you keep about a user, and gives you one single panel to really understand who the user is and give you the ability to drive security decisions, usability decisions, and a lot more. For those of you who've just started to use Okta, I highly recommend looking into the things of UD that you may not have been exposed to yet. And we have some great content on this that hopefully you'll learn more about as the session goes on as well. With that, on to our next question for our panel. When we think about transformation and change, there's obviously different hurdles and steps that we go through. As you started on this journey, and maybe even after you continued on the journey, what have been some of the more significant hurdles that you've expected and maybe not expected as well? Why don't we start with Gary?
Yeah, thanks. I would say at Pluralsight, the most significant hurdle that we expected to run into would be local user management and legacy systems running in the cloud. What we realized pretty early on in our Okta journey was that we wouldn't be using Active Directory for computer management or local authentication. So the hurdle quickly shifted to IAM for all of our SaaS applications. Surprisingly, several modern applications do not natively support SAML or SCIM. So SaaS applications implement SAML differently, and thankfully Okta has a lot of highly configurable options when it comes to SaaS applications, and it helps you mitigate the differences.
Thanks, Gary. What about Scott?
Like Gary, we had some of the same hurdles. We had started with Okta, as I mentioned, so a lot of our user management was already, via Okta, but at the same time, we had Active Directory as the user object directory. We'd learned before I started at Invitae that a directory is not the same as an identity manager. And we still had quite a lot of manual work to assign applications to people. The SSO wasn't working very well with a lot of the AD apps because there were just different ways that they were supported, or a lot of them weren't supported at all. And so there was a lot of manual work that went behind managing the user community with Active Directory, even with Okta, when we were AD mastered. One of the hurdles we kind of encountered when we wanted to go into being Okta mastered was actually just finding out things that were managed by AD that were legacy that didn't work with Okta when we first tried it. And so when this was done a few years ago, there was just this massive hue and cry when they tried to cut over it, and just a bunch of things didn't work. And after 3 or 4 days, they just had to throw in the towel. That was the most significant hurdle, was just finding out what didn't work when we made the transition. And the last time we did it, as I said before, Okta had greatly matured, and when we did it last year, it was relatively seamless. And at this point, we're doing 100% of our user management via Okta.
That's really great to hear. And I think that's exactly what you just said about knowing what works and what doesn't work. I think all of us really relate to that on any digital transformation journey we're on. Aaron, how about you? How was this journey for you? Where did you get stuck, or what did you not foresee maybe?
Yeah, so I guess where we got stuck initially was just convincing people that this model or mastering users in Okta is the best model or architecture that we could go with. So we spent a fair bit of time up front just showing what the benefits would be, particularly to our technical staff and also our help desk, because we had to get them on board with the change. So their world was going to completely shift. So we spent a lot of time up front doing that, and I think it paid off later in the process. The other challenge that we faced during our implementation is because we did it during lockdown here in Australia as well. So we had to deliver the project and all of the changes to our users while they were working from home. And that was, we handled that well in terms of being able to communicate well with our users, but it certainly added an additional level of challenge, particularly communicating between the implementation team. You like to sit in a room and work together. So that was certainly added, risk to the project, but we're able to work through that just by being, very transparent about the timing of the changes, what we expected of our users, and what the benefits would be of the change. So in our change, we're able to also get rid of passwords in the login experience. So we went passwordless for remote access, and we also get rid of things like password changes every 90 days and other parts of the sign-in experience, which were frustrating users, particularly when they were working from home at that point as well. So, and we're able to make that change and integrate with success factors within the kind of 8 to 10 weeks. So, and master our users, in Okta from there. So, definitely lots of learnings from going through that process. But I think what paid off the most for us, is working with our technical staff and our service desk to understand the size of the change and how the management day to day would change for them.
That's really helpful to hear, Aaron. I think what you also just mentioned about with the journey being during COVID, that must have definitely been really interesting. And I think a lot of us have had, we all have stories from the past year, but it's really interesting to see how we've all enabled work from home, and also nice to hear that Okta has been able to help in that journey. So one of the things we talked about was, work from home and all these changing pieces with how the remote world has started to develop and how access is changing. So one of the things that we talk about a lot here at Okta with our customers, with the group here, is zero trust. And zero trust is something that's really been on the uprise of how do we create a journey that is both usable and secure. So really being able to access what you need when you need based on who you are in that context, and making sure that that checks is happening dynamically in context. One thing that Okta really makes sure we can do is enable that path for customers to go on the zero trust journey. And this starts from what we just touched on in Universal Directory, which is even being able to understand, who the users are, what are the information around the user that we should look at anytime we're making access decisions, being able to build that into our policies and then delivering an experience. So when we start to talk about moving away from AD, sometimes it also brings up moving away from the on-prem network and really looking at what does a user today look like in terms of how they interact with the different data tools and data sets. And one of the really key pieces of zero trust is not just being able to identify the security side of it, but making sure that we don't lose usability as a price of that. And I think that's been something that we've been focusing on a lot more at Okta as well, with a lot of the different feature sets that we offer, with be it with context or be it with passwordless. And hopefully we'll get to continue touching on that as well. So with that, we talked about hurdles a little bit, and I think we all have that moment of, man, I'm really glad I did that. That's a great, this really has made an impact in our business model and what we're doing. So if you were to choose, one or two things that have had a really, great positive impact in the work you've done, what would that be? Aaron, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, good question. I think, going through as I mentioned before, the implementation during the pandemic and lockdown, certainly added challenges. But I think one of the positive, the impacts that we were able to achieve with the change was just to our users. As I said before, we went passwordless. So being able to remove, I guess, steps that users had to take to log in every day was very key positive outcome of the change. So I think that was probably the biggest thing, and things we still get complimented on to this day. So in terms of some of the positive things that people saw in the company during that time as well. So I think that certainly was a result of a lot of communications up front. So we spent a lot of time telling people about the change, but we also chose to require everybody to change their password and actually register as if they're activating with Okta. The reason we did that is because it allowed us to master, their password in Okta and push that down to Active Directory, which meant a number of changes with that. So that was obviously impacting, but as I said earlier, the benefit was that we're able to tell people that your logging experience will get better. So we used a bit of the carrot to entice them to do that, and uptake was very, very good. We also put things like reminders on the old sign-in as well. So, 2 days until we cut over to Okta, make sure you register and get ready for the change. So I think the positive for me was certainly making that decision up front. It's made our lives a lot easier, from then on in. And also just really the communications around it. I think just making sure that we reached our users, particularly during that hard time where we were working remotely. And we've also got people at very remote sites as well that still had to work. So being able to, touch base with them remotely via video chat and talk them through the change to get them excited about it too, and make sure that they're ready for the cutover.
That's pretty awesome. I would say that one of the more positive things on the Pluralsight side was we decided to work tightly with our internal teams, be it our security teams, our procurement teams, our compliance teams. What that ended up doing for us was it kind of injected us into the process of procuring new SaaS applications. And at Pluralsight, we have hundreds of them. So that helped us get in front of some of our issues when it comes to picking solutions that support Okta from day one. We're doing a lot of catch up with some of our applications that don't. But I would say form those tight relationships with your internal teams, and that would probably be my recommendation there.
Ultimately, it comes down to for Invitae, it comes down to the user experience and automation of the user experience, right? So when we were Active Directory mastered, it was difficult and cumbersome to just assign applications to users and deprovision when the users left. It was very manual. And when you consider the context of what Active Directory was designed for, right? I mean, this Active Directory is 20 years old now, and the world was almost completely on-prem when Active Directory was built and deployed, and it does what it was designed to do exceptionally well. It's a great directory, but then the world moved to SaaS, and now AD is no longer. It's not an identity manager, as we talked before. So when we moved to Okta, all of a sudden, all these applications that are on the web, we can do assignment to users, we can do automatic provisioning to users, we do SSO to users, and it vastly improves the user experience when they not have to remember 37 passwords, because Okta takes care of it. And when a user leaves, we don't have to remember what 25 different applications they were using. We just disable them in Okta, and it goes through and handles it at all the remote applications. So the greatest positive impact on the journey is just the user impact, making it easier for the users and managing users. And that made the entire thing worth it.
These are the great things we like to hear as we're, building products and building features that can help in these journeys. So I really appreciate kind of all of you kind of talking through that. So one of the things, we touched on was, can we get rid of AD completely? Can we not? And, one of the things that at Okta we've more recently, I think, invested in and talked about is how do we move from not just thinking about cloud apps as the resources, but thinking about everything else in an environment. That includes on-prem applications, that includes servers, and just many different things. And everything we talk about in terms of context or zero trust or anything else, these are layers that should apply to anything that's a resource in your environment. A couple of the products that we've introduced more recent years is first, Okta Access Gateway. The goal of Okta Access Gateway is to help meet a customer where they are. So if you have on-prem applications that maybe don't even use modern protocols and things like that, how are we able to bring them to the forefront? How do we integrate them with Okta and still give you the same security and usability that you would have gotten for your cloud applications? So Okta Access Gateway really gives us the ability to extend the simplicity, the reliability of our standard IDaaS structure to on-prem web applications as well. And for those of you who are interested in this, please do go to the sessions that are related to Okta Access Gateway at Octane to learn more. The next product that we've talked about more recently is Advanced Server Access. So like I mentioned, there's a lot of different resources that we want to bring to the table. So Advanced Server Access really changes how we think about SSH and RDP access. You get to use the power of Universal Directory for lifecycle management all the way down to your servers. So not only can you start to think about the users being on AD as your source and then having to create those domain accounts on the machine, but you could actually start to think about servers just the way you would applications and be able to take the best of UD and the best of Okta and take it downstream all the way down to the servers and not just your cloud applications. So these are just some examples of things to think about as the landscape keeps changing and expanding in terms of directories and more, as well as the applications and resources that you're trying to create access to. So, we've learned a lot already from all three of you. So one of the things I would ask is, I think there's a lot of people in the audience and me, myself, as I work with different customers on this, is what would be kind of the tips, be it the good or the bad and the ugly? What would be the tips you would give people on this journey, even if they're just getting started, maybe they're somewhere in the middle, right where you are or later? What would that advice be? Aaron, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, good questions. There's lots of advice, but I guess if I could pick a couple of things, I think the big item would be setting your reference architecture up front. So working out, where you want to head, how far you want to go towards, removing dependence on Active Directory. So I think Scott touched on it well before, in the sense that we've got more and more cloud applications, that are being provisioned every day. It's Active Directory has done its job for 20 years, but it's no longer this has the capabilities that we need for that kind of modern ecosystem of tools and platforms. So I guess my advice would be just upfront spending the time to build your target architecture, and then really sell that internally to your stakeholders. So particularly technical stakeholders. So you want them on board with you, understanding the capabilities of what a tool like Okta can do in helping transition quickly to that architecture. So I think, spending that time up front will, I guess, smooth out any changes. People will know what your vision is for the future as well, even if there's multiple steps to get there. And so you can lay that out to them and say, it's going to be a bit of pain through these, couple of transition or changes, but this is where we're going to be, in kind of 6 or 12 months or potentially longer. So that would be my kind of core advice. And the second part is what I touched on earlier, just being upfront with your users about the change that's coming, what they need to do, and the benefits of that. So as I said, I think that helped us really achieve the timeframes. During the lockdown, when we did transition, there was we were thinking to ourselves, should we defer the change or should we continue with it? We felt the benefits of doing it was so great that for the minimal price that people had to pay to register and get ready for the change, the benefits were there. So we kind of evaluated that carefully, and I feel we made the right call given the feedback we've got. But yeah, that change process, really helped us along in terms of that smooth transition.
Yeah, change management always seems key to anything you want to make happen in a company. So that's great advice. Scott, what about you?
As Aaron touched on, develop your architecture and understand what the end game looks like. But in order to do that, take some time and read the fine material. Understand what you can do, understand your options. And then the second point is absolutely have a test environment. I've actually heard of people trying to do a transition like this live and just don't, right? It's like working without a net as a trapeze artist. You have a test environment. And then the third piece is just make sure that your account rep knows that you're about to do this, so that he can line up some resources for you. One of the things that we did, during our transition, even the second time, it went really well, but we still hit a couple of snags, and all I had to do is contact my account rep. And 15 minutes later, I had some really high-powered resources from Okta support on my side.
Great. That's really great to hear. And I think just for everybody here, like the Okta team is here to support. There may be pieces that interface with Okta that don't interface with Okta, but we're here to go on that journey with you. And I think, we're hearing a lot about change management, and also, you hit some snags, and also just planning, right? Planning seems really key in all of this, especially test environments, having an Okta preview environment and making sure it mimics your prod as close to possible, and being able to connect that to different things is really, really important. Gary, how about you? What tips would you like to give everybody here?
Aaron and Scott nailed it. I would say that the transition away from AD is not necessarily easy, especially if you're super ingrained in Active Directory. But moving away from it, I feel, is very rewarding. Coming from someone who's on a very slim, lean team, we don't have the resources on our team to continue to operate AD infrastructure for any reason, really. And it's just not something we're going to invest in. So I would say, kind of like Scott said, read the fine print, look at everything Okta has to offer, use the LDAP interface, use Universal Directory, use SCIM, workflows, super cool part, workflows. Advanced server access has been great for a core piece of our product. So use it all, use anything you can. It's all good stuff.
Great. Thanks, Gary. And I think these are exactly the kind of things that we all learn from, be it, we're ready to really make the shift from AD already, or maybe there's somewhere in the middle, or maybe there's even part of like a larger digital transformation journey. with that, we've heard a lot about your journey so far and where things are going. I'd love to hear about, how reducing kind of the dependency on AD has supported the larger business goals, like your long-term goals. And I'm also curious about, you've heard about some of our roadmap items, be it at Octane today or otherwise in other sessions. Have there been things that you're thinking about for the future and how it ties to your goals in general? Why don't we start with Scott?
Up until now, Invitae has largely been using Okta just for user management, right? For assigning applications, provisioning, deprovisioning. We haven't really had the personnel to look more into some of the more, recent Okta functionality. And one of the things we're looking at is the advanced server access. That looks pretty spectacular because we've got a pretty significant server farm still. I mean, there's a time and a place for AD, right? And we still have AD, and it's not going anywhere. So that's why we have an AD hybrid. So we have to manage access to the servers. And one of the things that Okta has brought forth lately is the advanced server access. There's a ton of new functionality that Okta is bringing forward, and it's amazing that Okta has come so far so fast. And I'm looking forward to spending more time in the other Octane sessions to see what else we can bring to bear. But so far it's server access and some of the like workflows and some of the other user access management are the big things.
Yeah, I think with Active Directory, as I mentioned before, we'll continue to reduce dependency on the directory itself. So, and continue to, I guess, push more memberships for groups and other access to the directory itself. So it'll become very much a target application as it is already. So we'll continue down that path. I guess where it supports our goals is, in future acquisitions. So as our business grows, so I'm kind of looking forward to the next big integration that we do, because it's going to be so much simpler. We know that we can integrate and bring on board a large number of users very, very quickly, and even pull users from another directory if we need to as part of an acquisition. So that's what I think it will support our long-term business goals in. We will see the benefits when that happens, hopefully in the future. And I guess in terms of roadmap, so we are heading very much down zero trust security model. So we've been with the having greenfields environment has been good, because we can kind of set our sights on that immediately and start to build towards that with the tooling and the implementations that we do along the way. So we've invested in some of the Microsoft security tools, obviously Okta. And so a lot of what we're going to be looking at using inside Okta is things like FastPass. And we're wanting to look at, bringing device health into the sign-on policies that we have. So really excited about getting our hands on those features, testing them out. We'll be working with our implementation partner as well to build that out into our environment. And we think it's going to, enhance that user experience even further for remote users in particular. Really excited about the other area, which is similar to what Scott mentioned, is utilizing workflows. We've started utilizing workflows to trigger a number of alerts to different stakeholders. So day to day, working with our implementation partner as well locally to deploy loads and loads of workflows to do various tasks that we can't automate yet. So we're actually seeing some immediate benefit from doing that as well. So, and even things like where we can't do a deprovisioning from an application, being able to trigger a workflow, when a user deactivates, to make sure that the application owner knows that that person's now exited the organization and they can do a manual cleanup. So I think there's a huge amount of value in the workflows, just day to day, improving those processes. And so, similar to Scott, very excited about seeing what else is going to come our way this year from Octane.
So reducing our reliance on Active Directory has helped us in a lot of ways, or really we didn't rely on it to begin with. It's just nice not having to deal with Active Directory, period, as a current tech company. Not having to deal with AD binds, computer objects, groups, name it, whatever. We don't have to deal with that. It's just super nice. Roadmap items. One of the biggest things we're looking forward to this year is shifting wireless authentication to Okta. It's been a long time coming. We've been waiting on it. It's out, so it's going to be great.
That was really great, guys. Thank you so much. It's been, we've been hearing different things about, roadmap items, and also I loved hearing about your journeys with some of our newer products as well. So just for the audience, we touched on ASA, we touched on OAG a little bit, but there's going to be a lot of sessions on this, and there's a lot of content online. But some of the ones we really recommend looking into, especially if you're interested in some of the themes that we've talked about today, is looking at workflows and looking at advanced server access, just as a way to really extend the impact of all the work you do in Okta outside of your cloud applications into the other things in your environment as well, and start to automate and think about your entire IT infrastructure and what that looks like at the next step. So that's something we really want to encourage and want to be able to support for you. We also heard about FastPass, and hopefully you've been able to hear about that before, but Okta is investing a lot in how we think about device identities overall. How will Okta understand who the user is, the identity of the user and device combined together, look at that context to make decisions, and also use features like FastPass to enable completely seamless authentication from any device. The cool thing about FastPass is you can get the kind of experience that in a traditional world you would only expect on a domain joined machine while on the network. You can now start to think about those use cases and flows from anywhere at any time, starting to really enable those zero trust journeys. So with that, we've heard a lot today that I think, we all have a lot of things to go back and look at and learn from. And we wanted to leave you with a few things that, Okta has had the chance to, ask customers about is, the different states. And I think a lot of the advice we heard from Aaron, Gary, and Scott today. So just to go through some of those steps. First, taking stock. So I think, one of the tips we heard today was really make sure we know, where you want to go, what's happening, and understand what works and what doesn't work. So I think take stock really comes back to that. What does the environment really look like? What does Active Directory touch? Where do my users come from? And the interesting thing about this is you do have to talk to different teams, because a lot of the times, especially if you've had an environment that it's been a long time since it's gone through like a really big update, it's hard to tell what pieces are connected to what unless we do a comprehensive overview. And that's really important when we start to think about things like directories and AD, because they're touching more things than we know sometimes, and unless we take stock of it, it's hard to know what the next steps are going to be. With this, when you think about like where Okta comes in, I think this step really gives you the chance to look at what are the different Okta infrastructures, but what is also your AD infrastructure? What is the scope? Who is your audience? Where are the users coming from? And being able to build what that looks like. The next step, and I think, we talked about directionally where you want to go, but we asked the panel here today also, what was some of those things that were not just hurdles, but what made that positive impact? So one of the things that we notice in terms of the quick win. So once you've taken stock of the environment, and I think a lot of you have been already be able to do this, is starting to bring all these synchronization into Okta. Can Okta start to understand your users regardless of if you're ready to move them from AD or not, but at least import, tie together those identities, and start to think about how does the login experience work, be it for cloud applications, on-prem applications, and really start to scope out what that experience looks like. And this securing access itself starts to get you to a world where the users are still connected to AD, but have different options on how they're able to access things and run different tools and technologies in the environment. As you kind of start to go through that, and I think this is where a lot of things start to change, is when we start to think about, okay, well, my users are in Okta, AD is bringing in the users, we have all these things happening. Should we be shifting our thinking on some of the tools that exist in our environment? So for example, lifecycle management. Each one of us thinks about onboarding and offboarding when we're looking at an IT landscape, because, employees come, employees go, and we need to make that really easy, that experience easy as well. One of the things you can think about is looking at things like HR as a master. What should our source of truth really be? Or maybe should our source of truth, can it be Okta itself? Do I need AD in the picture, or is it a mix of both? Do I want to treat my contractors differently and they go in Okta directly, while I think of my employees and maybe they still need AD because of some other applications that I have on the network and things like that? When you start to have the opportunity to think about account management, we highly recommend looking at what does it really take to onboard a user, what does it really take to offboard a user, and what does that access lifecycle look like, and what are the moving pieces there, including HR, including who your actual audiences are, and what those workflows look like. Next, we talk about the different pieces that come in due to integrations. And I think when we talk about zero trust, one of the things that is really key to understand is it's not just about the user, but also what are they using to access the different tools, should they have permissions based on their context. One of the key examples I would throw out here is devices, for example. In a more traditional world years ago, we would all have domain joined machines that had access to resources on the network. But as we move to a world where, let's be real, just in the past year, we've all been working from home, how do we create those experiences without compromising on security? So one of the things to look at is what are the other integrations in your environment that play a part in that story? For example, how do you manage your devices? What does the experience on that device look like based on your security rules? And are you able to provide experiences that are going to make that easy, but also bring in that understanding from all these integration partners? So really start to go broad. And this is just one example, but you can start to think about all the different tools that you may have in your environment playing a part in enabling that zero trust journey. Once you kind of go through these phases, one thing we see is really starting to understand, you're starting to get disruptive a little bit and start to think about, okay, now that we've talked about these resources, how do we expand what resources we're talking about and really be able to react? Now, the great thing about starting to see some quick impact from, some of the advice we got today is that you start to look forward to what your next initiative is going to be and start to see the impacts of that. Is it going to be quicker to respond now that you have LCM set up the right way, or you have connections to start to see the users differently based on the audience? Your ability to be more agile in this environment starts to be reflected in the things you want to do in the environment. This is another example. When you start to bring everything together, we start to think about what is really the scope of different pieces. You still may have AD, and maybe AD is only touching the Windows servers. Maybe for Linux, you're able to do advanced server access, and you're able to think about expanding that. What you'll notice on any of these pictures is the expanding sizes of the different pieces that are part of it. So AD is still there, but maybe you can use it only for the pieces where it's still there, which will change over time. And the octoscope and ability to enable things, be it ourselves or be it with partners, starts to expand as you make different decisions. Another example here is thinking about how should we secure BYOD devices? Is this something that we want to allow in our environment? And asking yourself those questions as you make those decisions in the environment. With that, I just wanted to go through a few tips with you, which we just touched on, but also I really wanted to thank Aaron, Gary, and Scott for being here and walking us through their actual real life journeys on Rethink AD. And Okta is here to support, but again, I think we learned so much from panels like this, so we really appreciate your time. For the audience, this is the end of the session, but we're going to be here to answer any questions you have. Please post them in chat, and all four of us will be available to answer those. With that, thanks everybody for being here, and hope you have a great day.